If you've ever thought to yourself, wow, DC continuity is a mess, well, Mark Waid and DC Comics have had the same thought. And they have just a book for you. The New History of the DC Universe is a 4-part comic series that looks to rectify the confusing timeline of the DC Universe. Mark Waid, along with various artists, including Todd Knock, Jerry Ordway, and Mike Allred, gives fans a definitive DC Universe timeline that is sure to not make sense in 5 to 10 years. But let's talk about it. Hey Internet, I'm Chris, and this is the place on the internet where I talk about comics, movies, games, and things I'm generally passionate about. If you want to hear more about DC Comics, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. As a fan of DC Comics since I was a kid, I have watched hours of videos, read plenty of articles, wikis, to figure out what exactly is the DC timeline. And to be honest, there really isn't one. Ever since Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC has been plagued by retcons, reboots, unreboots, and reboots again, which has made it incredibly difficult to nail down a timeline for DC's history. And DC themselves have known that, and that is why they have done things like Crisis on Infinite Earths, New 52, Rebirth, and plenty of other things. So this new book, The New History of the DC Universe by Mark Waid, which is going to be 4 parts, gives us a definitive timeline of the DC Universe, which I appreciate. If you read the first issue, which I have, I got it digitally, it reads less like a story and more, again, like a timeline. If you've ever watched or read Watchmen, especially Zack Snyder's Watchmen movie, when you get that little times are changing montage of the history of that universe, the Watchmen universe, or you've watched Forrest Gump and seen Forrest go through many eras of American history, that is what this book is. And it's not, and I like it, but the one thing I would say DC should have done with this book is actually make it just like an actual like hardcover, and eventually it will be that. But if you read it as a single issue, you're like, oh, I want the next thing, because it doesn't read like a story. It's literally telling you year by year, decade by decade, character by character, what the DC Universe timeline is. You go through from the Big Bang, what the Source Wall is, the Endless, like there's so many things that are really cool. It integrates pieces of the DC Universe, which sometimes are part of the mainline continuity, sometimes are not. For example, the Milestone Universe, like the Dakota stuff, we get sort of Icon landing on Earth, which was a cool addition, meaning that those characters, despite going in and out of DC mainline continuity, are now officially in the DC Universe canon. This, if it holds, because knowing DC, 5 to 10 years, this may mean nothing. But for now, they are a part of that. And it's cool. Like you see, I think Mark Waid does a really good job of introducing every little character, and even some little, like, again, more recent details, like if you read Jeff Johns' Stargirl and the JSA stuff they were doing and Flashpoint Beyond, you know that the sidekicks like of the Golden Age were taken out of time and then they were reintroduced to the timeline, and those characters, including Alan Scott's villain, the Red Lantern, appear in this first issue, which is really cool. I love that Alan Scott story, and it's a good way to kind of be like, hey, if you've been reading DC Comics for the last few years, this is a really good reward for you. But also, if you're a long-term fan, this kind of answers a lot of questions and also sort of like streamlines things like Hawkman and Hawkgirl's confusing history throughout the DC universe. And this first book is really kind of takes us through the Golden Age. We see sort of Wonder Woman in the JSA, and then it ends with sort of like the Silver Age beginning as the US government enlists a bunch of scientists and Martian Manhunter lands on Earth, and we know the next issue will probably deal with Superman landing. I know some people may get a little bit upset because if you look at it, characters like Batman and Superman are Golden Age characters. They began in the Golden Age, and part of that is why DC continuity is so confusing. 80 years later, we're still sort of telling stories about them being in their 30s, their early 40s, so it becomes really hard to kind of plot this out. But Mark Waid, I think, is doing a good job, and again, I think this will really read well in a trade or hardcover, and it'll be something that you'll it kind of acts as like a Bible that you can give anyone. And I'd imagine when sort of like the DCU starts to pick up, this is the thing they'll give to directors and actors, like, hey, like this, if you want to know what the DC universe is, this is what it is. And again, it's cool. Like for me, there's a bunch of aspects of DC lore and continuity I've always had questions about, and I feel like they're hard to explain because there's the post crisis, pre New 52, post New 52, post Rebirth. Now we have the Absolute Universe, all those things. Some of them are a little bit easier to kind of wrap your head around. And then you have the introduction of the Charleston characters. Like DC has a really convoluted history. Some of that is to their advantage. Like they've been able to create and reinvent characters, and that's why they do a better job of having legacy characters than I'll say like Marvel. Like you've had multiple Green Lanterns, multiple Flashes, that kind of thing. But it works to their detriment because when you're creating like a new, let's say, media property like the DCU, you have all these fans of different aspects of DC continuity. So it kind of splinters the fandom in a lot of ways. And hopefully this book could kind of bring us all together and have a unified vision of what the DC timeline is. And I like it. I thought it was a really great sort of, when I was a kid, it was cool to kind of borrow, like go into the library and read those encyclopedias about like certain characters and stuff, which I don't think they really do anymore. You know, it's turned into YouTube videos, like video essays and stuff, which is great. But I think this kind of book is sorely missed, and it'll be fun to kind of introduce new readers to DC continuity in this way through this 4-issue miniseries with some really great talent. Todd Knock, Jerry Ordway, Mike Allred, and Mark Waid has been a part of DC Comics for 40 years. You know, they've been at Marvel, they've been at DC, and what they've been doing lately, especially with books like World's Finest, Justice League Unlimited, they've really been toying with classic aspects of these characters, classic eras. So someone that has seen those eras throughout time and seen maybe some of the mistakes that DC has made when it comes to their reboots and retcons, I think he's the perfect writer for this. And issue 1 definitely highlights that. And outside of that historical aspect, there's just cool moments like sort of we see the birth of Ra's al Ghul and Vandal Savage, characters that are immortal and have lived throughout different timelines and different eras and survived reboots. So I think there's moments, if you are a fan of these eras in particular, like this first issue where you have like the Golden Age, if you're a fan of the Unknown Soldier, Sergeant Rock, some of those early interpretations of characters, and even like, yes, this is the Golden Age, but it even goes into medieval times, the westerns. You see Jonah Hex, Diablo. So it's one of those things that like, hey, if you're a fan of DC Comics, this is the book for you. And I think DC is really smart in releasing this as Superman is coming out, because I feel there will be a lot of new DC fans that'll be in the same place I was when I was trying to figure out the convoluted history of DC Comics. The next issue will highlight the Silver Age, will probably be arguably the most important issue as we see Superman landing on Earth. But what did you guys think of the new history of the DC Universe? Do you think it does a good job of retelling the history of the DC Universe? Let me know. Like, comment, subscribe. Peace.